for the practice.
We can put ourselves on mute and then start when we start.
See.
Because of the bandwidth, when maybe I'm not speaking, I will switch off my video, if that's okay.
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 Are we live yet?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So yeah, we just crossed 3 p.m. So
We'll give few minutes for the participants to get online, and then we will start shortly.
Sure.
Hi, good evening. I trust all of you can hear me properly. Great. So I'm Niroshi Sirivansa, Head of the Business School and Member Relations. On behalf of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka, I would like to welcome you to the CA Sri Lanka CFO Forum, Navigating Businesses Through Uncertain Times, organized in collaboration with the Risk Management Society. So in the current context, businesses are expected to have dynamic and agile risk management strategies to steer through challenging times. In such a context, the CFOs have an essential role to play in helping drive businesses amid increasing risks and uncertainty. So our panel for this evening consists of experts in Sri Lanka and India who plays a prominent role in their respective industry sectors. So this is a very brief introduction of our panel. Mr. Mahendra Jayasekera, Managing Director of Lanka Voltiles PLC, Lanka Tiles PLC, Lanka Ceramics PLC, Swistech Ceylon PLC, and Swistech Aluminium Limited. Ms. Swastika Basu, Chief Enterprise Risk Management, Tata Steel Limited, Jamshedpur, I think I pronounced it right. Mr. Venkataraman T V, Head Internal Audit and Risk Management, Ashok Leyland, India, and Mr. Rohit Kumar, Global General Counsel, UPL Limited, India. And our moderator for this evening is Mr. Prasenna Balachandran, Chief Risk and Control Officer, Hemas Holdings. Now, I would like to invite Mr. Gopal Krishnan. He's the Director Global Development for South Asia, RIMS, to tell us briefly about the Risk Management Society.
Thank you, Niroshi, and good afternoon and good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining in today. It is a pleasure to have such an august gathering. We have attendees count increasing by the minute, and we also have a great panel coming in. And I know that I am the only person right now between you and the panel discussion. So without taking much time, I'll just introduce RIMS. RIMS is Risk and Insurance Management Society. It's a 70-year-old organization, and we are in the area of risk management, and we like to spread awareness around risk management as a topic, as a subject, because we feel that it is something which is most urgent at this moment, given the situation that we are all living in. And that is precisely the reason why we have the topic for today's discussion is also around uncertainty. And the panel which is here with us, it is obviously a cross-industry panel, and they would be sharing their perspectives on the various topics. We really have lined up some very interesting discussions. From RIMS, I thank CA Sri Lanka for this opportunity to allow us to host this webinar together. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion. From a RIMS perspective, we organize events, and as a part of that, we are very shortly on the 3rd and 4th of December, we are going to organize the RIMS India Risk Forum 2021. It's a virtual forum, so anyone can join, and we'll be sharing a bit more details to all of you through Niroshi. So thank you so much and welcome all of you. And over to you, Prasenna. Thank you.
Thank you, Gopal. So before I hand over to Prasanna, few more key points that I want to highlight. So we have allocated a time towards the end for the questions of the audience. So please type your questions or comments on the Q&A section, which is on the bottom of the screen, for the convenience of our moderator. And also for CA members, you are required to complete a brief form to confirm the CPD hours for this session. So we will post a link in the chat option shortly. So please complete that form in order to confirm. And if you want to explore the subject of enterprise risk management further, we are commencing a 5-week course shortly at CA Sri Lanka Business School with Mr. Prasenna Balachandran. So if you want to get information about that, you can contact the Business School of CA Sri Lanka. So without any further delay, I would like to invite Prasenna to take over. Prasenna, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you for the opportunity given to moderate this session, which is going to be quite an interesting session by looking at the panelists. So today's session is about navigating business through uncertain times. Okay, so navigating business through uncertain times. So uncertain times, uncertainty, it's not something unusual or unheard term for Sri Lankans, isn't it? So it seems like we are jumping from frying pan to pan, different types of uncertainties we are facing. So we faced COVID-19, and then we are now facing some sort of a financial crisis. And while we are discussing all these, now we are hearing about Chinese Evergrande property developers facing bankruptcy, and which can have an impact on the Chinese banks. And then we don't know what sort of an impact it may have on us. So the uncertainty is nothing unusual for Sri Lankans. So we have been living, I mean, from the war times to up to now, we have been living through so much of uncertainties. I mean, to tell you a personal thing, like when I was used to go to schooling, there had been bomb blast always, like, and we take one route, and on the other route there'll be a bomb blast, so we change the route, and then we anyhow reach schools. So uncertainty is nothing which is unusual to Sri Lankans, and we used to live with it, and now it's time for us to embrace it. So two more points before I read the questions. Like, one is why uncertainty is affecting us this much, and what do you think in the future the uncertainty is going to affect us more and more? Of course, yes. There are many reasons. Many scholars have identified many reasons why uncertainty is going to affect us more and more. But I just want to point one reason out of that, that is the dependencies. So if you take the businesses or the countries or even people, we are depending on each other too much these days. A problem in China having an impact in Colombo. Sometime back, Thailand faced heavy rain, and we had a laptop shortage in Colombo. So like that, the world is so connected now. So a problem which is happening in Sydney or a problem which is happening in Montreal is going to affect Colombo or Delhi or other cities. So the dependencies are too much. So it is important for us to understand these dependencies, how much our supply chains, how much our revenue streams are depending on other economies and other factors. And we should be able to analyze and understand them. Then only we can convert the uncertainty into some sort of a risk, which we can think about managing. The second point, just I want to set the context, or the second point also I want to talk about, right, in terms of uncertainties, what we are facing and the risk what we are facing. In the risk management theories, they identify this in two terms. One is black swan and the other one is gray rhino. So if I take a black swan, that's an unknown event, something which we have never imagined, but just happening, right? Various scholars have various suggestions and ideas what we should do in terms of black swan. My personal view would be, don't do much, be prepared for everything as much as possible. There's no way you can predict a black swan and start preparing for that. We don't know how the black swan will affect us or what would be the next black swan even. The second thing is about the gray rhino. So the gray rhino risk, what we identify as gray rhino risk are the risks which we know, which are there. For example, global warming, we know. For example, we are depending on certain countries for our supply chain, we know. But we don't take any action to manage it. We happily sit and wait until, like a charging rhino, it comes very close to us, then there's no way to manage it. So these are the gray rhino risks which we know, which is there sitting in our risk registers, in risk reports, which is sometimes highlighted at the board meetings, and but we don't take appropriate action around them. Anyhow, so that's how I decided I wanted to set the context. Let's start with the first question to Mahendra. So let me start with you to set the context even better. What are the uncertainties generally you see in the current context in your industry? What sort of uncertainties you are facing? I mean, do you think that we are facing more and more uncertainties? And if yes, if you'd like to tell us about a few of the uncertainties which we faced. You're on mute, Mahendra.
Yeah, thank you, Prasanna, and good afternoon to all of you. Yes, answering your question, now, when you talk about uncertainties, of course, for me, there are two types of uncertainties. One is the general uncertainties affecting all of us, and then there are uncertainties that are specific to the industry we operate in. Now, when I talk about the general uncertainties we are facing, the number one uncertainty for us in Sri Lanka is policy uncertainty. Now, that is a key uncertainty all industries and all businesses are facing in Sri Lanka, because there is not only policy uncertainty, there is also the uncertainty of ad hoc policy making. Now, what we have seen is basically due to the pandemic also, lot of policy decisions had been taken in the recent past, in the recent 2 years, that don't have specific direction. So as a result of that, the business are in a very precarious position when it comes to planning their future as to how they should approach markets, approach their suppliers, approach their even workforce. And then comes specific to the industry. Now, actually, before I speak about specifics to the industry, one more point I missed out is in Sri Lanka and also probably worldwide, there is another uncertainty we are seeing that is playing a very big role. That has become a big barrier to decision-making process. That is the information uncertainty. Now, what we are seeing is information today that is available anywhere in the world through any channel is so uncertain and so unreliable, because now say for example, even globally acclaimed bodies like WHO don't have reliable information about the pandemic, how it is affecting the people, what is the situation with the vaccine program, what is the impact the vaccines are going to have, what is the impact the vaccines is going to have on the general population and the world, the economic situation. So Sri Lanka also is not an exception, because if you take Sri Lanka, we have so much information uncertainty, because we don't know our infection rate, we don't know our death rate, we don't know our vaccination program, we don't know vaccine availability. And as a result of that, we have a big problem in planning our businesses. Now, how do we operate our factories? At what capacity we operate our factories? What do we tell our employees? How do we ready our employees to come to work, to work in the given environment? There is so much uncertainty, really. So, but we should know how to manage that uncertainty. Then number two, coming back to our industry, like all other industries, we have a big uncertainty risk that we have to manage, because number one is, now when the pandemic broke out, right, what in Sri Lanka we did was basically we banned imports. Now as a result of that, there is a big shortage of supply in the market, and the local manufacturers are doing extremely well. But problem is, when the government asks these companies, are you planning to increase production? Then what is going to be our answer? Yes and no, because to meet the supply, we need to expand production, but without knowing the policy direction, with certainty, we can't put in money to expand production, because expanding production will take maybe at least 1.5 to 2 years, and by that time, where the policy framework is going to be is anybody's guess. Because
so that's something like you start your manufacturing, and then the government changes the policy, and the imports are allowed, and then you has to fight with the cheaper products which are entering the market.
Yes, because now say for example, if I just give you an example, in the recent past, how we track this policy uncertainty and policy direction was when the national reserve position goes up to about 5 to 6 billion rupees, the government becomes comfortable and they start relaxing imports. Really. When the reserve position drops to about 3 billion rupees, they tighten controls. Really. So how do we respond to that? How do we respond to that? So that is a key question the companies need to ask. Then, of course, to face that situation, the managing directors and of course the chief financial officers, chief risk officers should be able to brief the board members adequately so that they are prepared to take whatever the decisions they need to take based on reliable information.
we'll come back to that, how to manage this uncertainty and all. We'll come back to
So
that.
those are the uncertainties I am seeing. Actually, I'm focusing on right now, which are general as well as specific to the industry.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Rohit, would you like to take us through, like, from your industry perspective, or from the agriculture industry, from your industry perspective, what sort of uncertainties the whole South Asian region is facing, and what you expect for Sri Lanka a little bit?
Sure. No, thank you, Prasenna, and thank you everyone for attending this session. And just to give a little bit of introduction about me and the company I work for, so that I can knit it to the answer I give. I head the legal function, global function for UPL, which is a crop protection product company. We are one of the largest in the world, and we operate in almost 120, 130 countries. And we are integral to the food value system of the world. We make products which help in food production, which is used in the farm to enhance productivity, enhance efficiency. So, Prasanna, I think your question, I would say there are 3 or 4 uncertainties we see in the industry. And not necessarily in any particular order, but I think the number 1 is climate change. There has been I think all of there has been enough literature, enough talk about climate change affecting how it is affecting each one of us. And one of the things we have seen is that the weather system in the world is being more erratic. There are more extremes. There are very few days of very heavy rainfall, and there are long span of dry weather. And all this affects farming. All this affects how farmers use the land for agriculture. So that's one large impact which we see. And just to conclude on this point, so overall, for example, as all of you know, rain is very vital to the food value chain, the agriculture productivity. And so even if India or parts of India or Sri Lanka do not have on an average shortfall in rain, but what has been happening in the last few years, and I think is going to get pronounced more in the near future, is that there'll be larger gaps of dry weather, the more dense rainfall on few days. So that's climate change.
There'll be more floods and dry seasons. So
Correct.
we will be having only one day or whatever full of rain, and then we will be having flood across Colombo and all the other places, and then without water and having some water, electricity problems and all. Yeah.
Correct. So that's flash floods and the city getting full of water, and so that's one, I think, big issue which we see. And I think we'll talk about what we are doing about it later. But so that's what. The second big one, which I don't think there is enough talk currently happening in that there is a lot of talk happening about it in certain section of business media, but not generally in the population, is the supply chain challenges. There is a lot of problem currently in exports. In the container movement. So most of the ports are blocked because of, it's somehow it's an after effect or effect of the pandemic. So the freight rates, for example, for the shipping freight rates have gone up exponentially. And, things which you could send, say, a container from India to US for $2,000 until, say a year and a half. Today, you will not get a container even if you're willing to pay $20,000. So, and that is because of, one COVID crisis hits a particular place and there's pile-on of containers. The ships don't get offloaded because there's not enough space to keep the containers, and so on and so forth, and its consequential effect. And I think, Prasanna, you in your opening, you did mention about how the world is related. And this is a fantastic example of how closely the world is related. You can have a problem in the port in Los Angeles, and you will not end up getting a container to ship your product in Colombo because of the problem in Los Angeles. So that's the second one. The third one I would think is, sometimes governments take knee-jerk and short-sighted policy decisions and regulations, and an immediate question or fact which comes to my mind is what is playing out in Sri Lanka recently with earlier this year the government banned certain kind of import of fertilizers and tried steering the entire country towards organic farming. And it's a pretty emotional issue. People want to have organic food and organic, but we know the science does not support it. At least the science does not support scaling of organic food production. And sometimes when governments don't look at don't take into account the entire scientific information data available around a particular topic and end up taking knee-jerk decisions, reactions, then it ends up impacting all of us, and that's the problem we are seeing. I mean, some of these are even.
Rohit, in the interest of time, if you can just mention the fourth one as well.
Yeah, sure. And the fourth, I think, is the reputational risk around uncertainty. Something gets reported rightly or wrongly in certain section of the media somewhere in the world, and how it ends up impacting you in some other way. And a lot of times there's not enough cross and check whether the facts which are getting reported is right or wrong. Sometimes it's wrong, but it ends up impacting you, and that's again another uncertainty which modern day world gives all of us.
Understood. Yeah. Thanks, Rohit, for identifying that 4 uncertainties. Now let's move to Swastika. So you have immense of exposure in managing risk across the globe. I would say, like in different various parts of the world. I saw from South America to India to all over the world. So I have actually, I'm going to combine 2 questions to you, right? In your view, what are the uncertainties? And the other thing, like, what are the best mechanism a board, maybe a management team can deploy to identify these uncertainties? Because we know uncertainties are everywhere, right? I mean, it's, if you open the newspaper, we can pick up something, but sometimes it does not get registered properly in the mind of the management. They don't take it serious. Sometimes even risk managers don't take it serious. Finance people don't take it serious. So what is the best way a company can deploy to identify these uncertainties and take it to their management discussions and finally to push it to the board discussions as well?
Thanks so much for having me on this webinar. So I would just like to, just to give a context to your question, to the uncertainties, I would just like to say that, I am working for a steel company, a steel industry, which is an integrated steel plant, which has operations right from, say, mining to hot metal and then steel making, and then to various products, and then, selling. So the entire gamut of it. And, there are uncertainties in the world, as you began by saying that, it's an interconnected world. But steel is a very, very popular and highly used commodity. You use it for house making, you use it for vehicles, you use it for everything. Steel is required for everything. But the uncertainty is in terms of, one of the uncertainties is in terms of the macroeconomic and the market, the macroeconomic, like you took the example of Evergrande. Something happening to Evergrande, which is a realty company in China, because it's in the business of making house. So, there the demand, dips, And hence, in turn, it affects the global economy, and in turn, it affects the prices of commodities like steel, etc. Given the fact that steel is a cyclical industry, there are ups and downs. So macroeconomic and the market risks are some of the biggest uncertainties that that steel industry sees. It is also affected by the trade barriers and protectionist policies, because post COVID there was a lot of protectionist policy which was put across the world. Other thing is that the fast-paced technological changes and shifting customer preferences. I want this kind of steel. I want this special grade of steel. I want the passenger vehicle to have the skin panel which is of this grade. So those are certain uncertainties where continuous adoption of new grades of steel or alternate materials are being looked at. So one is the market and one is the macroeconomic factor. The second, I would say, is a very big uncertainty and which actually affects the profitability of the company is the commodity risk. Like coal and iron ore, which are very, very key. Those are the more key ingredients of steel making. So iron ore, I don't know how technical the people are, but it is used in the ratio of 1:1.6. And coal is used in the ratio of 1:1. They are significant contributors to the input steel making cost. These commodities have global supply chains. And here the supply chain, somebody else mentioned, that uncertainty also gets factored into it. Their prices get impacted by various factors like dynamical geopolitical landscape. China does not want to take from Australia. China takes from Indonesia. As a result, what happens is in Southeast Asia, there is a glut of that certain kind of coal, and hence the input prices rise. Then there is a demand supply imbalance. Weather patterns, Australia has a lot of coal mines. So weather patterns, policy
Swastika,
intervention.
in the interest of time, like whether we already discussed about weather with Rohit. So in the interest of time, like is it possible for you to elaborate, like how can you bring this to a management discussion or a board discussion? What are the mechanisms? Because everybody will be busy in doing their day-to-day jobs, but these things might just come and kill us. So how do we formalize it?
So I think what is most important is, and I will speak from my experience, is that we have a very structured enterprise risk management process which is deployed across the organization. According to this process, you identify the risks proactively. The most important thing is the word proactive here, because you scan the external environment. We use a method called testing, which is political, economical, social, technology, legal, and environment, so that all the aspects of the technology are, all the aspects of the environment are looked at. You identify proactively, something which is happening somewhere, how the impact of that will be felt on your industry or your company. Once these risks are identified, there is a very, very strong due diligence process to, assess the risk. Yeah, I'll just come to that. Sorry. No, please go ahead.
How frequently the pestle analysis is done?
It is done at the start of the annual business planning season, and also it can be done during the mid-year, just to have a cross check that whether something significant change in the environment. Because you see, post COVID, what has happened is things are changing very, very frequently. So once you do that analysis, you identify the risks. See, for steel industry, while climate change has been discussed, but that is something which is looming large, because steel is a very hard to abate industry. There's a lot of CO2 emission which is there. It's a capex heavy industry. So how, what are the things which will affect? And when you analyze that, you analyze it with various tools. Like say, we use root cause analysis. We do use an event tree analysis, which shows that if the risk plays out, what is the impact that will happen? And once we do that, we then present it to the management and to the risk management or the risk management committee of board that, these are the significant risks which have the potential of impacting the company. And we have a very strong bottom-up approach. What you said, that everybody is busy. We have a very strong bottom-up approach, which means all the business units, they identify their risks. From there, based on the threshold, the risks are aggregated and then escalated to a certain level and then presented to the risk management committee of the board. And we present the risks in a way that, not to give them a panic signal, but to say that these are the risks which are looming on the horizon. And we are working on it with some of the key mitigation strategies. Another key thing which takes the attention of the top management, risk management committee is the residual risk. The residual risk is what is the amount of risk with which I'm left with, which gives me an indication whether my mitigation strategies are necessary, whether my mitigation strategies are sufficient. So I think these catch the attention of the risk management committee of board.
True. Thank you very much, Swastika, for that. Venkataraman, just a question from you, like how do you see the management teams, how does this happens in Ashok Leyland in terms of identification of the risk and in terms of evaluating the risk? How does it go to the management discussions and how it's getting pushed to the board discussions?
Yeah, thank you, Prasenna. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. Yes, please proceed.
Okay, first and foremost, I would like to thank RIMS and the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka for giving me the opportunity. Before I move forward on your question, Prasenna, being the last person to receive the question, I have the advantage or disadvantage of knowing that all of my esteemed fellow panelists have already spoken on the subject so eloquently that I have very little to offer, something which is new. But let me try and attempt the question in a slightly different way.
Sure.
As Swastika has already commented upon the fact that, risk management exercise is grounds up and, it is, of course, taken all the way up to the risk committee of the board. But fundamentally, I think what we also do is that the role that the risk management function plays at Ashok Leyland, and to give a quick backdrop of what Ashok Leyland is for people who are not familiar with the company, while we have a Lanka Ashok Leyland in Colombo, I'm sure some of you would have heard about the company, but it is India's second.
We are very, very familiar about the business here. We are very, very familiar about Lanka Ashok Leyland here.
Right. So Ashok Leyland is, it's a 75-year-old organization, and we are the second largest manufacturer of commercial vehicles in India. We have presence in over 30 countries and, primarily manufacturing the medium and heavy commercial vehicles, as also the light commercial vehicles, while we have presence in certain other sectors like defense, and then, of course, our aftermarket services and the power solutions business, which contribute to the ancillary or adjacent businesses that we have. Let me, give a quick, take in terms of the maturity of the risk management process in Ashok Leyland. I mean, we, of course, as I said, we are a 75-year-old organization, and risk management in India came to the fore after the Securities and Exchange Board of India came out with the listing obligations for disclosures for the directors. And as a part of that, as a part of the listing requirements, risk management became initially a compliance-related requirement where companies had to start putting in a process to identify risks. But we have moved away from then till now in a very large canvas to actually embed risk management as part of the strategy setting exercise for the organization. So while we, and I think Swastika and others have also touched upon the need to have risk management embedded into the strategy setting exercise, what we do is we engage with the business right at the beginning of the annual planning exercise to look at what are the key business objectives. And, as a result of looking at the business landscape, what are the dynamics or those key risk indicators which could impact the attainment of those business objectives. And I'm talking about business objectives from a strategic context. As you know, risk management is, risk is nothing but the uncertainty in the attainment of strategic business objectives. So that is the underlying premise on which the subject of risk management has evolved. So moving forward, once we have identified the key risk indicators, and this includes the PESEL, which is the political, economic, social, technology, legal, and environment. All of these areas are sort of distilled into the respective KRAs or KPIs, which is the key performance indicators. And then, we do have workshops, which where we deliberate on the likelihood of the event occurring, the impact if the event were to occur, and also the velocity with which an event could occur. Should that, we are talking about the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. So as far as the black swan is concerned, obviously we will not have much of an insight on. Black swan like a COVID-19 event was not even something that was on the risk register. But gray rhinos, and which is what Prasenna, you started off talking about. These are, domains which we are all aware of. The fact that, we have a personal data protection bill, which is on the annual for quite some time, is a known event. But we suspect it could be a gray rhino because not many companies are actually getting fully prepared. It's like the GDPR in the Europe, right? So these sort of events, how do we prepare for that? Now, talking about the automotive sector, I'll just spend 2 minutes more. The automotive sector, specifically the commercial vehicle sector, is it's one of those parameters to measure the performance of the economy. If the commercial vehicle sector is doing well, that means it can be correlated to the fact that the economy is doing well. In our line of business, we are hugely impacted by how the macroeconomic fundamentals are visible, and where is the shift in terms of the geopolitical risks. What are the sectoral indices? If I were to just take an example, vehicles such as the tipper is extremely dependent on how the spend on infrastructure is there on the economy. So tippers, the performance of tippers will completely depend on whether there is going to be a government spend on infrastructure. So gathering the market intelligence, and this is not done by the risk management function, this is actually done by the business heads. But having said that, we engage with the business heads to look at, how are the macroeconomic fundamentals playing out on the business performance, or how do they see the outlook? We also tap into risk intelligence from the various published sources, such as the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Outlook. We also take in inputs from the leading consulting companies, inputs such as the Big Four or the McKinsey's of the world, which all gives a perspective in terms of, how are the risks panning out across the globe, and how does it reflect across the sector, specifically the auto sector. We'll take into account the financial performance of peer companies in the auto sector, and look at what are the risks that they have assessed, because if you look at a published financial statement, you will also have a sectoral outlook provided by the competition. And we try and map out whether it sort of resonates with the risk that we have collated. So all in all, I think this distilled information is discussed with the business heads. Risk mitigation action plans are baked into the strategic setting exercise. And today, in today's information age, there are no surprises unless we have a COVID-19 situation. But I think by and large, we are fairly conversant with the headwinds, and we are fairly conversant as an organization in terms of how risk can impact, the adverse events can impact the organization, and there are those safeguards that we build in on a real-time basis. Having said that, the role of the risk management function is to engage and provide those leads for discussion. So this is where I would like to pause, and then of course move to the next.
Okay. So there's a question from the audience, and I would like to ask this question from Swastika or Venkataraman, but since Venkataraman, you gave your input, let me ask from Swastika, then maybe you can follow. Swastika, the question that we got was, if the regulatory environment doesn't mandate, prescribe having a risk management structure in place, how do you manage the risk portfolio? Since management may not be very keen to address it is in a structured manner. I'm pretty sure this will be a question anyhow coming in the minds of many panelists, because most of the Colombo-based companies may not have a formal risk management function because they are not big enough and the budgets may not be adequate to have it. So for a small organization, what would be your advice? Like which department who has to run this process or take control of this process? I know risk has to be managed by everybody in the company, but overall this ERM thing has to be driven by which department?
So one is that in India, of course, SEBI mandates that we have the risk disclosures every quarter, the listed companies, and they have now increased the number of companies from 500 to top 1,000. But this is a question which you face when we, as you rightly said, when we started the journey. So risk has a very negative connotation because everybody thinks risk to be a negative impact. The challenge is that people who are driving the risk, and I'll come to who should do it, the challenge is how to ingrain it in the minds of the organization of risk as a performance enabler rather than a negative impact. You know, risk is something, what is risk? It is an uncertainty which is going to impact your business objective in a negative manner, such that you are not able to achieve your whatever is your target or your business objective. So risks are always to your business objective. And in case you identify risk and proactively identify and manage, what are we effectively doing? We are effectively managing performance. So that is the risk culture that needs to be ingrained in the organization, maybe a smaller organization or wherever it is not mandated, that it is a part of performance enabler. Once that comes, and the role of the top management, and here I would really like to say that Tata Steel, the Tata Group, the top management focus on the risk is very, very important. The tone from the top, what we say, because they are not. It's saying that don't shoot the messenger. There is no way that the messenger or the person who's identified the risk gets shot. In fact, the risk intelligent culture is that you look at the risk and you weigh it, that how much risk should we take, whether we should avoid it, whether we should accept it and go by it, whether we should mitigate it, or whether we should transfer it. So in this kind of thing actually enables the risk management to be ingrained in the organization more as a performance enabler. Coming to your question of who is the right thing. So risk, because it is a line, it is the first line of defense is the line managers, because risk is to the business objective. It is best that the risk team is an independent team, maybe reporting to the to whoever, one head, but the risk team has to be an independent team, and the role of the risk team is
let's say
very
that there's no risk team. There's no risk team. I mean, there's a finance department is there, there's an internal department. So who should drive it?
So maybe to start with, the corporate audit team can drive it because they look at the they do the auditing, so they are looking at the risks also. It's not an ideal way because the corporate audit is actually the third line of defense, because whatever risks you have, if you, in case there is a smooth handover, you hand over those risks, which the corporate audit again audits to ensure that the risk does not play out. So a small team, maybe in the finance team or in the strategy team, because risk is interlinked to the strategy. The risks to strategy and the risk of strategy is very, very key. So maybe a part of the strategy team, maybe a part of the, in smaller organizations, as you rightly say, that, they may not have a separate team. We started off as a part of a corporate audit team. But then very soon it was felt that the independence was not there. So hence it was separated out. Yeah. So that is how it is there.
Okay. Venkataraman, anything you want to add to that in terms of small organization, who should be driving this function? Which
I
we don't
think
have this function, let's say.
I think Swastika has covered most of it. The only other point I would like to add here is that, for an effective risk manager, or I should say to have an effective risk management facilitation, the person who drives risk management should have a robust understanding of the business and the organizational dynamics. What this means is it is not translated, it is not prescribed in any framework as such, but one of the key tenets for a successful risk management function is the function head needs to have a robust understanding of the business and the key business drivers. Without that, it is difficult to visualize the kind of risk that can impact business objectives. Because ultimately, again, what we are trying to protect is enterprise value. And how do you protect enterprise value unless you know what are the different kinds of risks? It doesn't have to be bucketed into operational, financial, or compliance. I mean, the bucketing is only semantics. But at the end of the day, what really you need to know, as an example, let me share with you. In a pharmaceutical industry, it is going to be the quality function which owns the risk, because the majority of the risks are concentrated around compliance, right? And because pharma is highly regulated in terms of the need for robust compliance mechanism. I mean, even if you have the slightest non-compliance, you could have your licenses revoked. So if you have that kind of a situation, then the risk function could be vested with the quality function, because then they take complete ownership for the risk management, because that's where 90 to 95% of the risks reside. Of course, there will be few other risks such as HR, cyber, and so on and so forth. But those are operational risks. So what we are trying to protect is enterprise value, and whoever has the ability to visualize and drive enterprise value protection should be the chief risk officer and facilitate risk management for the organization.
Got it. Thank you for that. So Mahendra, I have two questions for you back to back. I'll just ask the first one. Now, I'm a risk professional, and there are risk professionals here, and you are a leading businessman in the country. And so I would like to ask from you, does it make sense for you, all this enterprise risk management, the process and all, from your perspective, from a board perspective, how do you see the value coming out of it? What do you think? You know that we are majority here, but we are not going to intermediate you.
No, Prasanna, it is like this. I mean, how I see this risk management process, right, is twofold, right? One aspect of risk management is rational. Second aspect of risk management is emotional, right? When we talk about risk management through maybe risk management institute, risk management tools, and all these things, we are talking about rational part of the risk management. You analyze data, you use numbers to make predictions, you do trend analysis, then you gather information, you present it, you do all that. That's a rational part of risk management, which the employees or the people in the organization can do. But in my opinion, it is not the rational risk management part that makes companies succeed or fail to a large extent. It's the emotional risk management part that will either make a company succeed or fail, because emotional risk management part is done by the top, maybe the managing director or even above, right? The board of directors and maybe the key shareholders. Sometimes they rely on emotional aspect more than the rational aspect to take risks. Sometimes, I mean, we have seen businessmen who take risks based on their past success rate, right? And that could be a key risk. That could be a key risk in risk management. But still people rely on that. And then, they rely on, intuition, gut to take risk. And sometimes what happens is in small economies, right? In relatively small economies, and even probably even big economies, it must be happening to a fairly good extent. You take a view, and those shareholders make sure that their view comes true through policy lobbying also, right? They don't let their view go wrong, and they make sure through policy lobbying and doing various things that their view is correct. And that is how these big corporations succeed. That is how these big companies succeed. Those companies don't rely on rational risk management part to take futuristic business decisions so much. But day-to-day risk management decision making, yes, they rely on the rational part. If I answered you correctly, that's how I look at it really.
Yeah. That's a good point. I have seen that in many instances when some big risk looming up in the country, and the lobbying happening, and the lobbying actually safeguarding the businesses.
What's the second question?
The second question is basically the now now we are continuously facing the uncertainty, the environment of uncertainty, and continuously our management teams are facing this. So how do you feel their culture, and how do you feel that they are feeling about it? Are they scared, or are they folding their sleeves and up for the fight? So not only from your organization, but you may be having enough connection with everybody, I mean, many businesses in the country. So what is the business sentiment like when our people faced with so much of uncertainties and risk back to back? What is their mentality?
No, actually what happens is, I mean, we have seen that often. They turn to divine powers. And that's a big cultural element. It's not only in Sri Lanka, it is in India as well. Because, you know, I mean, our culture is such that, you know, we rely on such sources. I mean, basically we are, you know, mostly traditionalists. You know, people think that, you know, the knowledge and wisdom come through divine powers really. So when they have difficulties, that is why you run to temples, you run to kovils, you turn to various divine sources to get energy. And I mean, we saw that happening during COVID also. Say, for example, I mean, in our organization, I mean, when people refuse to come to work, saying, you know, because they rely on predictions, they speak to foretellers, they speak to, you know, maybe the clergy, you know, and they rely on the information they collect through those sources to take their decisions. But we have to make sure as companies that, you know, rational risk management part takes over that process and make sure that these people are convinced that, yes, you know, okay, without hurting their feelings, right? You should be able to take them onto your side by talking to them, by convincing them that there is another aspect, because we can't let the companies go down, because if the companies go down, the economy will go down, and their economy, the people's economy, gets affected really. So, I mean, when big economies were able to support their population through various social programs like relief programs, we could not. I mean, as a country, we could not, because our finances don't allow that. So whether there is a pandemic or not, there at one point there was a necessity for people to come to work to earn their living. And then the companies also had to create a trade-off between health and safety and the economy. So that is the role the companies had to play, you know, in Sri Lankan context, because we could not afford the protracted lockdowns. Because we could not afford to pay employees. Most of the companies could not afford. They didn't have reserves. There was no government support system. So all these things. So culture plays a big role. As I said, you know, people are reluctant because they are attached to their culture so much, and the culture does not allow them to think out of the box really. They rely on the cultural values and what they have inherited from their forefathers to face a situation like that. But then the companies also have a duty to go out of the box, you know, convince people using scientific information, scientific data, and all that, to make sure that they are convinced to come to work. Because in our case, whatever people thought, finally, personally, I had to get people to come to work because we could not shut down the factories. So we had to create a situation where they had to come to work. We use so many tools and techniques to get people to come to work, even though in their own heart they were not ready to come to work.
True. Overall, they are now. What is the general mindset like? Are they ready to take up this risk, or are they still going back a little bit reluctant?
No, I think the reluctance has gone away a lot because, as companies, we use moral suasion also, so to speak, but it has paid off because, the fact that we got the employees to come to work and the companies ran, and of course, then there was policy support also, and the companies have done well. Local industries in Sri Lanka have done well, and people's remuneration package has increased tremendously. So they are happy, and now they don't want to stay at home. They like to come to work, even if we tell them. But when we tell them, if you stay at home, your income will suffer, because there is no way we can equate the income of a person who comes to work and a person who doesn't come to work. So if you don't come to work, your income suffers. If you come to work, your income improves. So when you give that information to the employees, when you give that equation to the employees, naturally people want to come to work. And as companies, what we have to do is to create that conducive environment for people to come to work and they feel safe to come to work. So that is our job, that we need to do. Having got people to come to work, unless we create that environment, in terms of health and safety, then we are putting people at risk, which we can't do. So we have to create that balance very consciously. We have to create that fine balance between health and safety and profitability.
A big role the leadership team has to play, isn't it?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. Rohit, I would like to direct the next question to you. In terms of maybe in terms of UPL or in terms of the industry, what are the elements? What do you say? Like, what are the elements which help the people to manage the risk better? Like, what are the fabrics of management, fabric of the decision making? What enables them to take the decisions, manage the decisions better?
I think, as Swastika and some of the other panel members mentioned, look, risk is a top down. The tone has to come from the top. And I think I would equate that as a symphony or an orchestra where everybody has to play a role, but you need to have a master who can, direct, at least put some semblance of what's happening in the orchestra. I don't think risk can be departmentalized, or it can be a particular department can do a better job or not the other. Historically, though, I've seen that at least in Indian context and in the Western world, it is something which has been managed by finance. But as I said, it's a symphony, so everybody has to play the role. I think one thing that has helped us better is because of our presence in so many countries, we have seen that many of these uncertainties which we face are actually predictable. You can, because you may have a problem in one part of the world and the same problem may come in another part of the world after 2 years. And if you can use the learnings from one part of the world and use it to lessen the problem in the other part of the world, I think that's a big learning we have seen. So I think that's one thing that helps, having that geographical strength where things, and a lot of these problems or uncertainties are as I said, are repetitive. I know you mentioned about black swan, but again, black swan is once in a century, once in a decade issue. And I think that helps. And second, I think that what also helps us to at least some extent is, and personally me, I think many of us who work in India, there's so much of diversity in India. There's so many problems, challenges, and there are so many complexities that once you start navigating these challenges with different parts, uncertainties with different groups, scaling that up to a bigger region, say Asia or even the world, I think people get better tuned into handling these uncertainties, because you have
Okay.
also handled uncertainty
Anything? Yeah, Rohit, anything the management or the leadership team does to create that mindset among the employees, because we are going to need that more and more, right? Because we are back to back hit with uncertainties. So we want that mindset to face these challenges and all. Anything from your point of view, like anything leadership teams or management can do to develop that sort of a mentality, that sort of a risk culture in the organization?
Sure. I think one thing that we have been doing and that's still work in progress is a constant feedback loop, where say the department heads gets, so there'll be a consultant whom we hire and they talk to different heads of the department, different people managing different functions, and they understand what the risk profile of particular department is, and they try, wherever they see that there is some area of improvement, some processes could be improved, something could be tweaked. That I think that feedback loop helps. Again, that is a top-down approach. It has to come from the top. And sometimes I've seen when the boards play an important role, the C-suite plays an important role. It kind of percolates and people start understanding that better and start playing their part much better.
Okay, thank you. So there's a question from the audience. I know it always comes, this question. So COVID-19 is a black swan, or is it a gray? No, it is a black swan event. So Professor Nazim Talib has identified it's not a black swan. The author of Black Swan theory. So what is the view? If anyone want to take up the answer, you can. Answer that. You can answer. Otherwise, just I will try to answer.
I think
Let me take a stab at it if it is okay. And I
Yes.
agree with the question that has been raised, the view that has been mentioned, that it is not a black swan event, because as as you look back at the events, whether it is the Spanish flu or even the other sort of pandemic outbreaks that have happened, even though it is a once in a century event, there have been various conversations around the need to prepare for an outbreak of a pandemic, given the amount of focus given on biological warfare and so on and so forth. Having said that, therefore, it is the timing that has caught most by surprise. And therefore, if you're talking about once in a century event, given the medical advancement, people were not really prepared for it. They must have said the likelihood is remote. But since it has occurred, people are now talking about it. We should have been prepared for it much better with the health medical facilities and so on and so forth. So the answer to the question is it is a gray rhino and not really a black.
Okay. Rohit, you want to mention something about it?
No, I think, look, I had read Fooled by Randomness and Black Swan even several years back when Talib wrote those two books. And I think it is a black swan event. I mean, most corporations, most of us think from, quarter perspective and, maybe year, and we may have a 2-year, 3-year plan. Nobody thinks about 5 years, 10 years, even 5 years and 10 years plan. I mean, none of the corporates, particularly the large ones, think about what will happen in 10 years time or 15 years time. I mean, they have some visibility, but most of them worry much more about their quarter results. So, anything which happens, I don't think anybody who's alive today has a memory of what happened in 1918. That is the last pandemic that happened, 1918, 1919. So, and there was no way in say 2019 or very early 2020, people could have predicted that's something like this is going to hit us in the immediate future. So I would think it's a black swan. I mean, with due regards to whatever my other fellow members said.
Anyhow, it's always an academic argument.
So, yeah, if I can just quickly add one point, if I am permitted, moderated, sir. Just to add on, I think even my view is that it is a black swan. Because, when we were, the most important thing here was, everybody, even Nassim Taleb, he came to India, I think, a couple of years back, and he was saying that we should be prepared for a epidemic, endemic kind of thing. But it started off in China that this is a health issue. What was not known, what hit the entire world is how the health issue translated into a business impact. That was actually not known by anybody, and it was very, very difficult to predict that. So, it actually boiled down to how quickly you anticipated the signals and how quickly you started working towards it so that the impact was minimized. Just to add on to what my other panelists said.
Thank you, Swastika. And my question to you, the next question also to you. Now, in terms of managing these risks, now we discussed about the importance of uncertainty, importance of identifying uncertainty, how uncertainty can destroy the businesses. And then we discussed about how to identify those risks and how to take it up to the board, how to take it up to the management, how to discuss. And then we heard from the CEO perspective, does it make sense? Whereas we have to focus more. We have to focus more on the emotional context compared to the rational context, as well as rational context is also important. Now we move to the managing these uncertainties. Now we have identified, we have analyzed, and we know it's an uncertainty. So what are the success stories in your industries, in your organizations? It doesn't need to be COVID-19. It can be a commodity risk problem. It can be a problem. It can be a problem of exchange rate risk. So would it be possible to let us know about one of the case study? Just one thing, like just to make the context even clear, I would say, like in the company which I work, we identified COVID as a risk in, say, 2019 December, and then the CEO took a decision, okay, go and buy as much as possible, 8 months, 9 months stock, you keep it. And that helped the company a lot to navigate all the supply chain problems and did not have to shut down the operations. So things like that. Swastika, would you like to tell us about a case study from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think, COVID-19 is the most recent, while we have lots of success stories, but COVID-19 is one of the recent success stories that we have. And more so because, in the way we sell in India, we sell more domestically because, there is more demand there rather than going to exports. So in the first couple of months of, post-COVID, 0 tons sold. Actually, the tonnage, there was no tonnage which was sold domestically. But, the entire organization, and that is where the cross-functional risk management approach, because different units, right from supply chain to marketing and sales to the order planning to sales planning, they all got together and they had the alternate mode of exporting steel. And the ports, the necessary connections were made with railways because steel was to be moved. Ports, the customers were done in the export region, and for the first quarter and the next quarter, we actually moved about 60 to 65% material to exports. So here the two key things from the risk management perspective and what has brought success is the cross-functional risk management and the agility in adapting to the new ways, because we did not know, we were not selling to exports, we were not transporting so much through the ports and through the seas, through container. To get all that, everything lined up was a very, very big thing. The other key thing which we did is
one thing like the agility you mentioned about it, and how did you develop that in your company in a short span? Like I assume it would have been a short span.
It was done in a very, very short span. So I think here, again, the culture, the risk culture comes into play, because the communication and the top-down approach is very, very key. You know, all the cross-functional team members, it was communicated that, you know, how severe or how serious the whole issue was, and you know how the risk was playing out, and what are the alternative risk scenarios were evaluated immediately. You know, if we are not able to sell here, then where are we going to sell? What is the best case scenario? What is the worst case scenario? What is the best, you know, most likely scenario? And then you know, that communication went down to the concerned division. The top management did a daily, you know, right at the CEO and MD level, there was a daily review with all the concerned person. There was one person who was designated with the business continuity plan, who owned the business continuity plan for Tata Steel. He actually had the entire functional review, and that is how, through quick communication, the agility was ensured, and everybody fell in line to achieve the objective.
That person is in addition to MD, right?
Yeah, he's below one level below the MD. He's at a vice president level. So he did the entire kind of review, and the whatever needed to be escalated, where says suppose some support was required or some quick advocacy was required with the government, like, you know, movement was stopped, interstate movement was stopped. How would we move steel? Because Jamshedpur, I don't know how many people in the audience are aware, it's in the eastern part of India and it's landlocked. Okay, so movement from eastern part of India to the ports, and you know, so needed a lot of approvals in the government, so advocacy, etc. So those things were escalated, and that is how the agility took place in the entire organization.
Understood. Thank you for that, Swastika. Venkataraman, from your side, like I know business would have got affected by the pandemic. Many risks. Like if you can talk about some other risks, that's fine. Otherwise, about pandemic, how any success stories on how it was managed in Ashok Leyland?
Yeah, sure. I think I will refrain from talking about the pandemic because we do have a very similar process, did have a very similar process to what Swastika mentioned. So I will not talk about the same. There is another one that I would like to highlight, which is with respect to, you know, the quick, response to a regulatory intervention, which had happened, I think, around March 2017. As you know, India is governed by the emission norms, or the commercial vehicle industry, as also the passenger car industry, is governed by emission norms. And we did a transition from the Bharat Stage 3, which is BS3, equivalent of Euro 3, to BS4 in a short span of time. So what really happened here was the fact that in 2017, while the initial discussions and probably the understanding which came from the government was that effective 1st April 2017, the automotive players or the commercial vehicle manufacturers will not be in a position to manufacture BS3 related vehicles. The Supreme Court of India intervened around the 29th of March 2017 to say it is not just the manufacturer, but you will also not be able to sell and register the BS3 vehicles. You will have to convert whatever is being sold effective 1st April 2017 will be only BS4, which is the Euro Stage 4 equivalent. Now that put the entire industry into a state of shock. What had happened was that people were left with,
that was not anticipated.
It was not anticipated. It was completely unknown. It was equivalent to a black swan event as far as the commercial vehicle industry was concerned. So there was a lot of stock that was unsold around the end of the month, and typically, as you know, it is the end of the month that you would see the sales picking up. And within overnight, certain decisions were taken. The senior operating team met up and deliberated on the actions to be taken. We interfaced with all the dealer network, that is our customers, and made sure that the quantum of stock which was unsold was, there were 3 different actions that were taken. Some of them were exported to the SAARC nations where the BS3 regime did not, there was no change. So wherever there was an acceptance of the BS3 vehicles, we did sell those to those nations. The second part was we dismantled those vehicles that could not be sold and converted them to BS4. There was a cost involved and there was a time frame involved. And the last one was wherever there was, there were excessive engines, we sold that in the secondary market. Now, these were actions that were taken to mitigate the risk. There was a minor cost involved, but luckily for us, given that, we were dealing with the year-end stocks, the quantum was really not significant. But this was a completely unprepared and unforeseen event. So government regulations in one way can hamper the risk landscape or can impact the risk landscape for some of these industries. I just thought it is something that I wanted to present to all of you, that this was a well-managed event actually.
Yeah. So in that particular event, like how did the management reacted? Like, was there a committee formed, or was there one person? Like in Swastika's case, she told there was one person who has been put in charge in terms of BCP. So what are the management changes and the structures and the decisions and all taken, so which enabled you to manage this in a very successful manner?
Yeah, so the ultimate owner of the decision vested with the CEO of the organization, the CEO and the managing director, but there were all those hands on the deck, which means that the product development team, the sales and marketing team, the quality team, and the aftermarket sales and service support, all of them were involved. And this was not something that was left to only the CEO to manage. They were, including finance. I think everybody came together to form a core team for managing this particular risk.
Okay. So what I understand from these case studies are the importance of having cross-functional understanding among the businesses is very much important to meet the uncertainty, because we don't know the uncertainty will come from which part, unless otherwise our departments are not connected and they are not working if they are not working together, the managing the uncertainty would be difficulty, and we may have to identify people properly and designate them, and we have to make them responsible or give them all the power to manage this uncertainty as well.
Yeah, agility is one of the core tenets for successful risk mitigation.
True. Right. Let's take some questions from the audience, and then exchange rate fluctuation is a critical factor that affects business. Even the manufacturing organization import raw material for their production. What will happen in coming period to the exchange rate, and how finance people can face this skyrocketing exchange rates? Okay. Anybody would like to answer this? Exchange rate risk.
Look, I think I'll say we operate in some of the regions or countries where the exchange rate fluctuation has been very high, particularly in LATAM. If you see countries like Argentina and Brazil, there has been a very significant exchange rate variation in the last, say, 2-3 years, historically as well, but particularly in the last 2-3 years. And again, this is a question which is better answered by finance experts. But what we do, one of the ways we manage it is also taking hedges. So we take options on the fluctuation so that we become neutral even if there's exchange rate variation. But of course, these are short-term hedges. These are, if we sell a product at a particular price, and the realization is only after say 90 days or 120 days, we hedge our against the exchange rate variation for that period. So that has helped us. But also what happens is that we have seen it that whenever there's large fluctuation of exchange rate, if your currency depreciates, mostly depreciates against the dollar, then the local prices also go up. So it kind of compensates. If you're a seller, then your local prices, the price you realize also goes up. So it kind of compensates the loss which you are making in those sales.
And Rohit, just a question. Like you may have assumed the dollar is going to, whatever the currency is going to appreciate back against dollar, right? You may have been thinking. Does it generally happen in the economies you have worked around?
Not typically, no. Typically, no, because if you see in most of these countries, the inflation rate is higher than you'll have in the US and the developed countries. The depreciation is also a function of the inflation. So if you have higher inflation, then your currency will depreciate over a period of time. But there could be moments where the currency also appreciates. For example, I remember in 2007-8, the Australian dollar appreciated quite a lot. In fact, it became more expensive than even the US dollars, which is again a rare phenomena, but it did happen on the backing of this huge commodity cycle where China was buying a lot of resources from Australia. And similarly, even there'll be periods of time where Brazilian reais would have appreciated over but over a longer range, it more often than not it depreciates.
Okay. Mahendra, there's a question for you from the audience.
Sure.
Yeah. So it says, with information uncertainty, financial forecast and planning for even shorter period is very difficult. As financial advisors, what kind of investment strategies better to use in this situation? I think you want to know about more like planning is becoming difficult. So how can we plan better in the future, better to manage our businesses?
Actually, it's a difficult question to answer, honestly, because of course I spoke about information uncertainty and unreliability. When information is unreliable, it is very difficult to plan. Now, of course, in our own organizations, we have this issue because we don't know what is in store for us maybe next week or week after. Now, say, for example, a simple thing like you take the previous question, foreign exchange risk. Now, in Sri Lanka, foreign exchange risk is a grave risk we are facing. Unlike probably, a lot of other countries, I mean, many other countries, Sri Lanka is in a very, very precarious position because I am sure those who are connected to this forum understand that there is a huge shortage of foreign currency in the market. And we cannot, if you are an importer, especially, if you are an importer, you don't know when you can import your next consignment. Whether when you send your LC application to the bank, you don't know when it will be open. And if you have a TT to be made, you don't know whether the bank will make that TT or not really. So there is a huge risk in the market. And of course, I must say, you have to bite the bullet also. Because when there is no foreign currency in the market, when there is no money to be sent, then you can't send money. There is no money to send. So, I mean, even in our organizations, we have had to curtail some of our operations because we can't import. And actually, right now, our fear is sometimes it may so happen that we may have to curtail our manufacturing operations for want of imported raw materials. I hope and pray that it will not come to that, but that's a big risk. So planning becomes that much difficult. That is understood. The main thing is to understand what exactly is the current situation. If you know the current situation properly, if you understand the current situation properly, then you can make some forecast. Now, say for example, if you are in an import related business, you know that your import consignments are very unlikely to come on time, then you have to plan your maybe employee deployment. You are maybe if you are running on rented space, how do you renegotiate rent to try and stay afloat? Because I mean, it's a very difficult proposition. There is no fixed answer I can give. Planning becomes that much critical, difficult, and I would use the word even deadly, because you give a plan and today you give a plan, tomorrow you realize that that plan is obsolete. That plan is no longer valid. So, I sympathize with the planners because it is extremely difficult to plan in an environment where we are in, especially in Sri Lanka.
So we used to study like 5-year plans, strategic plans, 10-year plans, and all.
No, I think it's all contingency planning today. It's all contingency planning today, because actually Sri Lanka is in a very, very unique position, because right now what we are seeing is that there is a huge intervention in the financial markets in the country, and that is why our foreign reserves, that is one reason our foreign reserves have dried up, because the money that would have otherwise come to Sri Lanka have gone elsewhere. So that's a very critical thing, and I think, of course, I think as businesses, we try to lobby the government to let the exchange rate loose somewhat, at least, so that it will at least to some extent reflect the proper market conditions, so that proper exchange inflows and outflows can take place and determine the right price. But if you don't do that, if you unduly intervene in the market, that is going to royally mess up the equilibrium in the economy.
Understood. Thanks, Mahendra. I have one more question, but I will ask from Swastika or Venkataraman, and then I will get a comment from you about this as well, because it looks like a very interesting question here. In high-risk situation, most of the organization take employees as secondments and do salary cards and reduce cadre, but expect more commitment, understanding on company situations from employees. How this situation can be justified under risk management. So you cut my salary, and then you want me to be more committed. So how to manage this from a risk management perspective? Any way to? I think this is more like an HR risk. Like anything you would you like to mention about how to manage this situation?
Yeah, if I can take a shot at this. Yeah, it's tricky, but again, I would say that in companies where this has been done, I think the leader has walked the talk. So it starts from the leader. That the leader has also taken a kind of a some sort of a salary cut, and then it is trickled down. And the most important thing is communication. That together, we are into it, and in case it is being done for a purpose. So here again, the risk culture comes into the fore. The risk culture of the organization comes into the fore, and the communication part is very important as to if we are doing it as a short-term measure, because employees are the most important. They are the human capital is becoming the most important part of an organization. Because they are what makes an organization. So I think that communication part is very, very important whenever such a thing happens, and that commitment is shown right from the top, and that everybody is part of a team, and together we face the situation, and together we come out of it. And while there have been instances of some salary cuts, and when the economy has shown some sort of a it is some sort of a positive, then there has been again something given back to the employees. Those things are also there. So it comes as a kind of overall package, more of a HR risk, more of a communication from the across the organization, more from the leadership to actually make the employees believe that everybody is in it together. So that was my take on it.
Okay, thanks for that, Swastika.
And
Venkataraman,
Prasenna, if I could add,
yeah.
I don't know if there are 2 minutes, can I add something?
Sure, go ahead, yeah.
Okay, so I think, as some of the panel members were also mentioning, look, it needs to be fair. If there is a salary cut or some expectation from the employee, it has to be fair. But I think the other point I wanted to mention was, Look, I think some of the organizations have also taken this as an opportunity, the pandemic as an opportunity to create goodwill. I can tell you about, for example, in my company, uh, our salary revisions happen in June every year, June, early July. And last year, when the pandemic had hit us really bad, hit everybody bad, we were lucky. I think one thing which the pandemic taught all of us is what is essential and what is non-essential. And thankfully, the industry I work for falls under essential. So we had a good time in terms of numbers and delivery. And even though there was a lot of uncertainty, the management took a decision that yes, all the employees will get a raise. It won't be the raise you typically get in a non-pandemic year, but everybody will get raises. Everybody will get their bonuses for the cycle which ended in March, and everybody got it. So I think it's also a question of how you need to look fair. If the company has done very well and you're cutting costs, you're cutting salaries, that's not good. The company will lose loyalty. But if you do the right communication and the company has not done well, and you're trying to take these steps to protect the company and the long-term interest also of the employee, not just of the shareholder and the management, then I think employees can also get that feeling and go by those cuts.
Thanks for that, Rohit. Venkataraman, would you like to add something to that, or they have covered whatever you wanted to say?
I'll sum it up in one line.
Okay.
The tone at the top can be gauged by the mood in the middle and the buzz at the bottom.
Well understood. Right. There's one question, like I will just ask this from Mahendra. In terms of your finance department, in terms of your finance departments or the audit departments and all, what else as a leader of the business, or what are you expecting at the moment from them? What the role you want them to play? I mean, they have been always playing the traditional roles of budgeting and account reporting, auditing, and all those stuff. But at the moment, as a board member, as a CEO of a blue chip, like what exactly you want from your finance teams? What different?
Okay, the finance team, whether it's finance team or anybody else, but specifically with the finance team, our expectation is that they should be up to date with the current knowledge that we need to have to drive the business. It is not only from financial point of view, but from the point of view of running the entire business, because finance team can easily take a helicopter view of the business. Actually, they are the best people in the organization who can affect the top management as to how to run the business, because they can see the cost structures, they can see cost streams, they can see revenue streams, and how revenue streams are affected, how cost streams are affected, all that they know. So they should be more proactive in providing information and responding to organizational needs. And what we expect from the finance team is not only to manage finance, but manage the business, because they are the best people next to the top management who can manage the business. But unfortunately, sometimes what we see is that we accountants sometimes have this undue tendency towards relying too much on controls and structures and things like that, which sometimes does not help the business. So they should be able to transcend. They should be able to make sure that the structures and the controls don't stifle the business, and they should be innovative enough to come up with plans so that the company can swiftly respond to current business challenges, because the challenges are wide and varied and they change every day really. So the finance department can take a very good look at it, and they can see it, they have a very good view of it. So they should be able to respond much faster than anybody else in the organization. So their role should be to advise the top management as to how to run the business field. That is what I expect. If my finance team come and say, hey, MD, what are you doing is nonsense. This is not the way to run the business. You should be running the business this way. I'm happy to see that kind of thing coming from my finance team.
Okay, understood. Thanks. Venkataraman, from your perspective, right? I mean, you may be a outsider to the finance team, but you may be seeing the finance team. So whatever Mahendra mentioned right now, I mean, how does it happens in India, like in terms of finance teams transformation? Do you see they are doing these things? Do you see they are helping the MDs in the manner Mahendra mentioned?
No, absolutely. That transformation is already it's becoming more mature these days. I think the finance leaders have to wear multiple hats, not just be bean counters. They have to be business partners. They have to wear the hat of chief risk officers in some organizations. They also may have to wear the hat of the chief strategy officer or the sustainability officer. The finance function has evolved to going beyond just accounting and managing the matters relating to pure play numbers alone. But having said that, of course, I would look at the CFO's role as a quasi CEO, right? He or she will have to actually navigate the business decisions in such a way that they are able to see the 360-degree view of the impact of any decision on the organization and not merely look at it from mere profitability or loss. But fiscal prudence will be the number one driving force for any decision making. Ultimately, we have to provide a return on the investment to the shareholders, and any decision, whether it is capital investments or with respect to certain other pricing policies, etc. One will have to look at it with the view of with the lens of what is the ultimate value that one can, how can we maximize value for the shareholder. Having said that, of course, sometimes we will have to forego short-term gains with keeping in mind the long-term objectives of the business in mind. So to come back to what Mahendra said, I think he summed it up very well to say that merely being bean counters, the finance function will not add value. Now let me also add a couple of other dimensions. Even the internal audit function have today moved away from looking at risks and controls only from a financial point of view. The internal audit function also looks at risk from the lens of cybersecurity, strategic risk, the technology risks in terms of the manufacturing space, given that a lot of us have moved to Industry 4.0. And therefore, when we talked about in the beginning, I think there was a reference to the fact that internal audit function should not be facilitating risk management. I think the answer, and this is my view, is that, and this has also been advocated by the Institute of Internal Auditors, to say that, facilitating risk management is probably a yes for the internal audit function, but, moving to wear the hat of a chief risk officer by the internal audit head may not be the right way of going about it. But having said that, in most companies today, the role of the internal audit function is seen only from a point of view of aggregation and facilitation of risk identification exercise. The actual ownership and risk mitigation vests with the respective business functions, right? So this is a distinction I wanted to share here, because I don't think it was answered earlier. I just wanted to bring that point onto the table. So when internal audit has a dialogue with the CFO or the finance function on risk, it is from the view of how are we protecting the value of the enterprise, or how are we ensuring that the upsides are managed better and the downsides are also mitigated.
Understood. Well understood that, Venkataraman. So let's move to some of the questions from the audience. Next one, unless anyone want to answer this question, I would like to route this to Swastika. Is it worth using a system to manage functions of ERM? If so, can a good system be recommended for the same? I don't know whether we can recommend a system, but is it good to use an enterprise risk management system in the organization?
My answer would be yes, it is good because enterprise risk management risks entails a lot of data analysis, lot of data mining. And then year on year, if you have to keep a trend of how the risks are moving over the year, because whether the risks are moving in, moving out, aggravating, reducing. So it entails a lot of data and a lot of good analysis can be done. So yes, an IT system which has all the data repository is very essential. We at Tata Steel, what we have done is we have developed a system internally, which has been developed by our IT department along with ERM. We have given the business functions for the system, and that has been deployed across the organization. And the entire data gets populated in that, and because the system is a live dashboard, you can get real-time data if it is linked to your system for any kind of industry like manufacturing or others where you have to monitor data, maybe hourly or daily or weekly. So it is very helpful. The concept of early warning indicators, which actually give you signals that there may be something which is playing out, or this may be some area of concern. There, through a system, you can build a threshold level where from the, as soon as it breaches the threshold, it can give indication to the risk owner that, something is seriously wrong. So these are some kind of benefits, advantages. It's a productivity tool. You don't need to do a lot of manual data analysis. It all gets done through the system. Tableau can be used, for the analysis. So yes, a system is very helpful as per my experience. All our external, we get risk maturity assessments done at a certain frequency as advised by our risk management committee of board, and even the assessments are done online. So it is a data repository and it is very helpful.
Okay. One question, since you mentioned about the board, came to my mind, like how many of you have a group or a board risk committee, like a committee, not the audit committee, which is focused on the financial controls and all, but a risk committee to focus on the risk and to manage at the board level?
Yeah, if I may take a stab at it. So it is mandated by the LODR, which is the Securities and Exchange Board of India's listing obligations and disclosure requirements. So a risk committee of the board is applicable for all listed public listed entities in India, at least the top 1,000 public listed entities by market capitalization.
Okay.
And it is also mandated that the chairperson of the board is an independent director, not from the company. So that brings in that, the independence of the risk management committee, because that reports the risks to the board on a quarterly basis.
All right.
That's right.
Fine. And we have some other questions, but guys, the problem is like these questions are a little bit out of context. Unless otherwise the panelists want to answer any of these questions. So yeah, I'll just read out the questions, but anyone, if you want to answer, you can let me know. Considering the current pandemic and economic conditions, should we be competitive and open up for imports to make industries to be efficient and price sensitive? I would think some of the questions you may have to ask from the government and the industries. Since Sri Lanka need to develop more export in the country, why our country government as a governance framework not trying to reduce the rules and regulations? Okay, that we have to ask from the government. What was the GVT restriction on production at AL? I'm not sure about that. What was the GVT restriction on production at AL? Ashok Leland. That's a question for you, Venkataraman. What was the GVT restriction on production at AL?
I'm not sure that I will have a response, and I don't want to comment on company-specific matters. Okay. But having said that, if it was something to do with a cross-border trade, I think that would have been a local government regulation. I know there were certain restrictions for export from India at for a given point in time, which has been recently lifted or amended.
Okay, fine. The important factor that we need to consider is what cost we implement the risk mitigating measures under certain current uncertain environment. Most of the businesses are run with small margins, and due to drastic reduction in overall business volumes, all companies are having difficult time. Yes, well understood. Then would the negotiating with non-USA countries to pay for their payables in their local currency is a good option to manage the impact of USD crisis in Sri Lanka? I don't think. Rohit, would you like to try this question, or it's out of context? So
I think I was looking at answering the previous question, and
yeah,
I think
please
it's
go
a
ahead.
very important, where somebody has raised that, you know, in a lot of these smaller companies where the margins are low, should we have this high cost compliance? And I think that's a very pertinent question to ask, not just in Sri Lanka, but, you know, in various parts of the world, particularly the developing countries. That's a question a lot of people ask in India as well. My colleagues who are on the panel, Mahendra, Swastika, I think they have a fair idea about how LODR regulations are going on, how compliance is getting tighter by the day. And there is cost to compliance. You know, there is cost to compliance, and, you know, and again, there is no right or wrong answer, but sometimes I think we all need to think whether we should have the first world compliance, you know, compliance which works in Europe or US. Should we force them upon companies which, you know, in India, in Sri Lanka, in other parts of developing country where the margins are low, we don't have the same level of maturity in terms of, you know, it's a process of evolution, and should we have that sort of compliance mechanism? I mean, a good example I have is, you know, the copyright law, which came in 18th century, if I'm not wrong. And initially, when the copyright, you know, as you might know, copyright law restricts a non-author to publish, you know, book, for example, of somebody, of another author. And when the copyright law came, US, it first came in Europe. And at that point in time, a lot of these books were published in the US and sold in the US without paying any royalty to the European authors. And US loved it because, you know, it could publish any of these European authors with very minimum prices and without paying any royalty, and, you know, scaling it up. But you know, when the copyright law came in the US, then the Europeans wanted the copyright law to come in the US so that there's a level playing field. Now, I think putting that context into the current context, you know what might work in the US, what might not work in Europe, may not work in India, may not work in Sri Lanka. And using the first world compliance model to push it in businesses in Sri Lanka and businesses in India and other developing country, I don't know whether that's right. You know, having I think Venkataraman was talking about the Bharat 4 compliance norm for emission, you know, which is the current European norm. Now, a person who in India whose per capita income is $2,000 a year should be put compliance where his cost of ownership goes up significantly. We are trying to make people move away from two-wheelers to four-wheelers. You know, if an entry-level car, should we make it more affordable or we should make it more secure? I think that's the question to answer. And again, there's no right or wrong question and answer to this. But I think those are very useful questions for all of us to ponder over and engage.
Right. So more or less that brings us.
And if you just give me a minute to add a little bit to what Rohit said. In fact, Nishan Madhushankar is the one who has asked this question. But I just want to add one point here. See, in Sri Lanka, yes, what he's saying is correct. Most of the businesses, okay, under the current circumstances, also are running with small margins, and due to drastic reduction in overall business volumes, all companies are having difficult times. Actually, one thing I want to tell you is quite openly, there is when it comes to policy framework, there is a big difference I personally see between Indian policy framework vis-a-vis business and Sri Lankan policy framework vis-a-vis business. Now, in Sri Lanka, our policy framework does not help adequately a business to get big, unfortunately. But in India, conversely, policy framework helps businesses to grow big, really. There is a big difference between our two policy frameworks. I'll give you one example. Now, this is my personal experience. We were about to sign an agreement with a state in India to set up a business. Of course, we could not sign it because of this COVID and all that. You know, one condition in that agreement was if we invested, say, 2 billion rupees in fixed assets, that 2 billion rupees could be set off against our VAT liability in the first 5 years. So, I mean, if you really think about it, that allows the company to make money, really. But in Sri Lanka, if you make money, you get a tax holiday. But there is no mechanism to help company make money. Now, and actually that is one key reason why most of our startup companies are struggling. Most of our startup companies are struggling to make money because our policy framework does not help companies to make big money and get big. Because helping a company to start business is one thing, but helping a company to make money is yet another thing. So actually, my personal experience I can speak from is that policy framework should be set right, whether under COVID or not under COVID, without COVID, right? For businesses, small businesses to make money, the policy framework should be set right. And unfortunately, our policy framework does not adequately support, I want to reiterate, does not adequately support small businesses to make big money. Thank you.
Fantastic. That's a great point, Mahendra. The loss-making companies, there's no protection mechanism, whereas the startups, there's no proper protection mechanism here. True. Right. So that brings to the end of our panel discussion. So I hope all of you have learned something from our panel discussion. I also personally learned a lot from discussing with the panelists. Of course, from the understanding the importance of uncertainty, how to identify uncertainty, and what are the steps as management teams we have to take to manage those uncertainties, such as creating teams and promoting agility and promoting cross-functional culture. And then it's about what role the finance teams and other risk and audit teams are supposed to play in the forthcoming world of uncertainty. We learned a lot from Ashok Leyland stories and UPL stories and Tata. And of course, thanks a lot, Mahendra. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. I'll personally send you a message. Over to you.
Thanks, Prasenna. It was indeed a very stimulating forum discussion. A big thank you for Mr. Mahendra Jayasekera, Ms. Swastika Basu, Mr. Venkataraman, Mr. Rohit Kumar, Mr. Prasenna Balachandran, and Mr. Gopal Krishnan and the Risk Management Society, Mr. Mahendra Jayasekera, President CA Sri Lanka, Mr. Sanjay Bandara, Vice President CA Sri Lanka and the Council of CA Sri Lanka, and Ms. Dulani Fernando, CEO of CA Sri Lanka, and all of you for joining us this evening. Please don't forget the feedback form, and good night and stay safe. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you so much.